these are mga words or kanang mga things or mga symbols that used to identify a particular operation. Okay, so now you need to identify the usage of data types and symbolic constants. So in here, what we will be saying by data types, the container of your data. If you have decimal place, if it is purely whole numbers, no, and if it is only characters, okay, so that will be included also, and you will also be having symbolic constants. So mga symbolic constants are the things that you identified as, let us say, a particular value. So for example, mga pi, mga e, no? So those are mga values that are constants, or you can define your own constants as well. Now, the next is you need to declare variables in C. So after that, you are to declare variables. So mga variables ninyo karon inyo nang gamiton, and you need to use these arithmetic expressions that you have learned and logical operators and math functions for sequential programs. So but pasabot ang operator precedence, you will be studying that, and finally you will create a very not so complicated but a straightforward na sequential program. So what we mean by sequential program, kana bang wala siya branch o wala po siya loop, okay, using the appropriate C program structure. Okay, so it will begin with this particular topic ninyo sa module 2. Now, maybe if you are going into, let us say, an online tutorial or learning or whatever in programming, the first thing that you will be making is siyang what is known as a hello world program. So mo to ka sa file, new file, then you will have your C++ source file, and you will write your first C program that would generally look like this. Sharp include, stdio, and you will have your my first C program, and you have printf, hello world, return 0. So this is probably the first program that you will be making. Okay, this will just simply display the text nga hello world using the printf nga print function in C programming, which is part of the standard input-output library. So in here, first of all, we'll be studying the components, how to build your particular code. Okay, once you get used to structuring your program in C, everything else will just simply fall into place. Okay, so dapat kahibaw gid mo structure sa inyong program muna. Kung unsa ni siyang mga include, mga main, o printf, o mga return 0. Okay, so much with that. Now let's go to the actual content of your program. So unsa man ning mga gitawag natong tokens. So tokens are symbols, no? These are the symbols or a group of words, no, or a word that will be used to perform a particular task or to specify a particular task. Kung man gitawag nilang token, mura bag ka ng, let us say you have a game, no, you have an online game, na kay token karon or sa ba nga klase nga reward nga ihatag nimo para i-exchange pud nimo og, let us say, item ba karon, exchange ba nimo og armor, exchange ba nimo og imong healing potion or whatever. So kaning siyang tokens pud sa C, this will perform certain task. Okay, so for example, ning kag semicolon, this is what is known as the statement terminator. May nga kag statement terminator, after the end of your program, you will have a semicolon, no? Every statement gibali ako sa line sa imong program, except ang kanang mga mo require og multiple lines. For example, keywords, mga if statement, kinahanglan man na sila multiple lines nga code. So na kay if statement, then follow up na nimo if statement is true or statement is false, which we will be discussing dito sa module 3. Okay? But for the meantime, kung ang imong program is sequential, may ganitag sequential, kana bang wala siya branch or in sequence, so you will be terminating all your lines in C using a semicolon. Okay? The next is what is known as comments. So naa kay backslash asterisk o asterisk backslash. This is used for multi-line comments. So may gani kag multi-line comments kanang it is not just simply one straight line. Daghan siya ba? It is composed of multiple rows of lines. Okay? So mo na siya karon ang atuang or multiple rows of lines. So on the other hand, single line comments is indicated by sa double asterisk. And with that, you will also be having keywords. So keywords, these are reserved words that will be used in order for you to perform certain task that is crucial for your program. For example, if this is used to create a branch, mga else statement. This is used to, in conjunction with your if statement, mga return. This will be used to give an output or a result for a particular function. And we have also white spaces. So, tanan nga white spaces, blank line is totally ignored in C. So, for example, kanang mga carriage return, mag-enter-enter na kadaghan, wala na siya bearing sa imong program. Okay, bisan pagdaghan pa imong enter. The same is true kung daghan ka og space nga ibutang sa imong program. Okay, so it is not it is ignored, but it is recommended that you will follow the appropriate formatting of your code. Although dili siya ma-error, but maulagi, if your code will be topsy-turvy, it will be very difficult to follow for someone else. Okay, and finally you have identifiers. So kaning mga identifiers nato karon, these are user-defined names of particular functions, class, module, or variable names that you will be using. So for example, mag-name ka karon og variable nga sum. So from that point forward, kana si variable nga sum will now be used as your variable to hold a particular value that you desire. So for example, siya magunit sa inyong accumulated value sa sum. So mo na iyang gamit karon. Now these tokens are user defined, meaning if you will be defining that once, you cannot define it all over again. No, unlike sa mobile programming like sa Python, pwede nimo redefine all over again. But in C programming, kung na-define na ganyan ani mga token, dili na nimo i-redefine balik. Okay? So starts with letters A to Z or small letters A to Z or underscore followed by 0 or more letters underscore or any digit. So but pasabot may kakaroon og variable name nimo kay A1, okay ra, pero may ka variable 1A dili siya pwede kay nag-start man siya digit. Kung may kag underscore 1A, okay ra siya. On the other hand, it is also case sensitive. So what we mean by case sensitive karon, ang imong declaration nga let us say token nimo nga sum nga capital tanan o sum nga small letters na ay small letters sa imong sum, dili siya parehas. Okay? So sunod, punctuations such as at, $, and percent cannot be used. So special characters are not allowed to name your variables. Okay, because some special characters have their purpose in terms of your programming nga requirements. So some of them are used as symbols for a particular operation, such as kanang percent, gamiton mo na siya sa modulo operator nimo, o kanang mga dash, gamiton as subtraction, asterisk will be used for multiplication, or can be used for a pointer. So dili siya pwede gamiton sa imuhang naming. Okay? So data types. Basic data types are as follow. So you have data types such as integer types, floating point types, and enumerated types, and kaning void types. But ang inyo yung gamiton is kaning basic types lang sa, okay? Actually, kaning enumerated types, these are part of structures which is beyond the scope of this particular koan. This is beyond the scope of fundamentals of programming, but will be covered in intermediate programming. But for this particular topic, ang kaning mga basic types na to, mao gid inyong gamiton later on if mag-start mo programming. Okay? So integer values, integer types, and floating point types. So what we'll be saying by integer types, these are numerical values without decimal places, while floating point types are numerical values that has ay decimal place. So, very simple. Ang integer, y decimal. Ang floating, na i decimal. Okay? Now, derived data types, kani sila karon, pointer types, array structures, unions, and functions, function types are kuan. Maybe you will not encounter for not all, no, kani i-encounter ninyo ani nga subject, but for sure, if you will be going into more advanced topics such as kaning arrays will be covered, no? Most definitely, arrays will be covered as a derived type. So may ganit tag derived type siya, it is coming from the basic data types that will create or compose that particular derived type. So for example, arrays. Ang arrays is just a set of primitive or basic data types. For example, integer arrays. So naakay 10 items. So 10 kabuk iyang elements for that particular integer. Okay? So, integer types or mga sa kung ano sa C++ ito, integral data types. So integer types, Boolean character, short integer, these are its equivalent size in bytes. So of course, you have sa inyong CSci 11 bytes is 8 bits. So gibali, ang one Boolean character, meaning a Boolean is from only 0 and 1 value, true or false, it will have 8 bits or 1 byte ang iyang size. The same is true with character. Ang character type nimo is also 1 byte pod. Okay? And your short integer is 2 bytes. So short integer karon mao ni gibali ang iyang range. So range gani niya ang minimum ug maximum nga value nga imong ibutang given that your data type is a short integer. For example, ang imuhang limit din is negative 32,768 for its negative value kung signed siya up to 32,767. So if you will be saying short integer x is equals to 3, okay ra. Kay kuan man siya, in between man siya ning range. Pero may gani kag short integer x is equals to 1 million, di na siya pwede. It will only accommodate the 2 bytes in the data or sa imuhang variable nga 1 million ang iyahang content. So ang katong 1 million nga data within that particular content, iya ratong kuhaon ang katong first 16 bits or 2 bytes. Okay? Ang katong uban, iya tong i-discard. So meaning, dili gani siya mabutang sa iyahang butanganan, ang excess iyang tantangon. Mo na siya kuan sa mga integral or integer data types. So dapat ibutang nimo the container must be larger or equal to the content nga imong ibutang. So for example, imong integer x is ibutangan nimo 60,000, okay ra kung unsigned data type siya. Pero kung signed data type siya, dili na siya pwede. Okay? So we'll be having an example to this later. Now, another is long int or int. So may ganitag long integer, ang iyang himuon karon is mubutang siya og up to 4 bytes. Meaning, it has a range from negative 2,147,483,648 up to 2,147,483,647. Mao na gibali ang iyahang limit. So for example, mo declare kag variable nga negative 1 million, okay ra. Negative 20 million, okay ra. Negative 20 billion, dili na pwede. Okay? So this is what is known as long integer. So long integer is useful if you will be handling data that is up to 32 bits. So mo na siya 32 bit ang iyahang size of the data that it can accept. Okay? So you will also have to deal with what is known as iyang unsigned part. So mo na siya double long integer. Ang kaning double long integer is kanang exponentially higher than of course your short long integer because it's already 8 bytes in length. So notice nga nagtikasaka ang iyahang length in bytes. So may ganitag length in bytes niya, ang iyang kadaghanon sa iyahang binary digits. So if this is just 32 bits kani siya 64 bits na because 8 bytes times 8 nga size per bit, so meaning 64 bit ang iyahang length. So 64 digits gibali in ones and zeros na combination. So you will have this particular range na medyo dako na siya kaayo. So it's very useful ang double long integer if you will be dealing with large kaayo nga numbers for your operation. Okay? So that is for integer types. So ang integer types is used kung walay decimal place. So karon kung imo nang butang ang decimal place, ang iyang himuon iyang i-discard ang imuhang decimal value if you will be forcing it to have a decimal or uban na flagan kag error. Okay, now ang floating data types on the other hand, no, ang mga floating point data types, they are not bound to integers values, meaning it's not bound to just simply whole numbers, but it has a decimal place. Now, in order to put into order ang iyahang decimal place, okay, so but pasabot para ang iyahang decimal place is kanang included sa imuhang operation, dili na niya i-express into its absolute 1 and 0 nga value, ibutang niya sa imuhang ones and zeros nga container or sa imuhang kanang iyang size in bytes. Instead, ang iyang gihimoan niya karon, it is expressed in a mathematical notation known as scientific notation. Kung nakinambong mo sa inyong scientific notation, sa inyuhang kuan, first digit na amo karoy whole number. Sa sunod ana naka decimal place. Sunod ana na po kay whole number, whole number, whole number, whole number. Unya naa kay multiplier nga value of a particular base such as base 10 raised to the power of, let us say 3, 4. So mo na karon ang imuhang gibali ang iyang mantisa. Okay, how iyang exponent. Okay? So for example, naa kay ko 318.51. Okay? So for example, kanang 318.51, if you express it into mathematical notation, mahimo na siyang 3.1851 times 10 to the 2. So buot pasabot, remember nga ang imong koan floating data types are just approximation. Okay? So may gani kag approximation, ang koan na niya, approximate value, dili siya ang exact na value. Okay, so that will be for floating data types, and of course ang kaning mga type definition. So dili kay ninyo ni gamiton kanang type def, maghimo kag imo walingon nga data type. So for example, kang type def new name, type def integer, ang imong integer karon nahimo na siyang fit ang pangan. But of course this is rarely used. Enumerated data types on the other hand are used to indicate like a kuan kana bang nakay menu, drop down list kung sa inyo hapang graphical user interface. This will declare an optional type, a set of 0 or more identifiers that can be used for a particular type. So for example, may kakaroon og enumeration color. Sa imong color nakay-set nga red, green ug blue. Unya ang iyahang pangan is variable C. So may kakaroon og C equals to blue, ang iyahang hatag nga value ana niya is 1 for this particular parts imong set. But it is not in general practically used, no, unless you will be going into kanang maghimo mo og mga GUI counterpart. Now, another is kani silang gitawag nato nga mga literal integer literals. So may ganitang integer literals, these are mga symbolic constants that you can use to identify or to initialize a particular variable. So may ganitang integer literals, this can be used as decimal, octal, or hexadecimal. So for example, 85, 0213, no? This is octal, and 0x 4b is hexadecimal. On the other hand, floating point literals can be indicated as follows, no? So 3.419, so you have a decimal place to indicate a particular decimal value, and of course, something like this, it can be implemented on that particular scenario. Okay, so Boolean literals on the other hand can be used to represent true or false, no? Character literals on the other hand can be used for kanang implementation of mga variable names. Usually it is enclosed in a single quotation ang imuhang mga character literals. So string literals are usually enclosed in double quotation. Strings are just a sequence or an array of characters. So we will be using that later on, labi na sa inyohang arrays na topic, which is in Module 5. Now, defining constants, on the other hand, you will be using the define preprocessor, no? You have a defined length, you will define, so kani sila, you will be defining a particular value for a variable. So may kakaroon nga, ang value sa imong variable nga length kay 10, o ang value sa imong width kay 5. So, both pasabot, may gani kag width, 5 na ayang both pasabot. Ana, may gani kag kuan, length, ang iyang both pasabot, ana, ang numerical value is 10. So, constant, on the other hand, is used to fix a particular kuan, or to tie up specific value to a variable. So, dili siya nimo mausob-usob ang iyahang content. Okay, so, now we will be going into variable declaration, then after that, I'll be giving you an example. So variable declaration is used to tell the compiler where to create a storage for a variable. So may gani kag variable declaration karon, it is to specify a particular name of a variable data type. So for example, na kay data type na int, pwede na nimo pangalan o bisag unsa. Basta mosunod lang ka sa sakto nga naming convention sa imong tokens. So for example, may kag I, okay, integer I. So karon si integer I, si I karon is now an integer. May kag integer J, si J karon is an integer. May kag integer K, si K karon is now an integer. So the same is true with double and float and with characters. So later on, this will be very useful if you will be assigning or initializing a value, okay? Using the literal constants na inyong ipambutang. So for example, may nakakaroon na integer D has a value of 3. So integer F will have a value of 5. So the same is true with float X has a value of 3.21. So remember nga kung mag-assign gani kag value, no, mag-assign gani ka, magbutang ka ba og value sa imong kuan kanang variable, there is what is known as the L value and the R value. So left hand expression o gitawag nato na right hand expression or R value. May gani kag L value, no? L value appears as either the left hand or the right hand of an assignment. So gibali pwede siya nga mo appear nga naa sa wa or naa sa tuo sa imong assignment. For example, kani this particular variable D, no, once declared, can appear as left and right. Okay? Pwede siya nga naa sa imuhang left, pwede po siya naa sa imong right. Okay? So, but pasabot, si variable D karon pwede mabutangan or pwede po muhatag. Okay? So, on the other hand, ang imuhang kuan, kanang gitawag nato nga R value, R expression that have assigned to, which means an R value may appear on the right, only on the right, but not on the left part of your assignment operations. So for example, variables are L values. Okay? So ang mga variables, pwede nga nasa left, pwede po nasa right. Meaning, pwede sila muhatag, pwede po sila tagaan of values. While numeric literals, on the other hand, are R values. So, numeric literals, these are mga 20, mga 50, no? So, these are used to indicate a particular numerical value for that numeric literal. Okay? So, example. Let's go to an example. No? That's quite a lengthy discussion. So, ngadto sa ato karong a simple na example sa tao code blocks. So, for example, now we'll be having a very simple code to have a particular part of this discussion. So, once you will be starting your program, no, maybe you will be using a code blocks or using other IDE. The first thing that you need to remember is you need to set up your code properly. Okay? So, na-open na? Okay, open na. File, plus source code, C. Okay. Done. Use sample. Okay. So in here, finish. So, just be sharing that sa inyong screen, no? Okay. So in here, this will be our code. Walang padaan naman. So first of all, you need to structure your code properly. Okay, so first, have an include na part. stdio na ini. Kaya we are on C pa man, stdio.h. Ano naman yung gawin? Okay, so that. Now you have your main. Okay. After you have your main, you will now have your code in here. So in here, you can write any code that you want. So first of all, let's begin with the data types. Okay? So data types na to are as follows. You have integer data types, no? So may kang integer data types. Return 0. Okay? So you have integer data types. Let's say variable x starting from 10. So with that, if you will be compiling this code, dili ni mo i-run, i-compile rin mo ang code. Okay, so this will give you, okay, wala errors sa inyong build process. Okay, so process terminated without one. Now, that is possible because the L value is a variable and the R value is a literal. Okay, but if imo na balihon, karon 10 is equals to x. So, ang mahitabuan niya is that you will be flagged with an error. Okay, wala. So, bot pasabot, na dili ko no makadawat og L value ang imuhang left operand. Ang operand ka na asawa dinhi. So, it cannot accept a particular value. But if you will be saying karon nga integer y is having a value of x. Okay, si x na pod ang naa sa imuhang right side. Okay? So, with that, if you will be compiling the code, okay, so it will not produce any error. Okay? So, tanaw nimo dinhi, wala siya error nga i-produce sa imuhang code. Karon, na build note paan target. So, compiling build log. Okay, ganito sa build log. So wala siya problema sa imong build log. So that is because the literal constant, no, the variable can be used for both for left and right. So pwede siya ma-L value. Di pareha sa R value nga nara siya sa right kanunay. So define. So may gani katong atong mga example earlier such as mga define. So may kag-define karon sa imuhang part sa imuhang code. You will be prompted with the following. So, may kag-define, usually, imo nang ibutang, usually nasa taas, no? Kay para, kanunay siya na magamit sa imuhang program. Usually, ang mga constants, batikod tanan, kasagaran, sa mga constants, o bitaw nang gitawag sila nga constant, kay no matter where you will be writing your code, it will always be used. For example, may sharp define pi is 8.1416. So karon, ang imong pi can be assigned to any other variable. Basta be sure na floating value ang imong gamiton. Okay? Float W. Okay? You have the value of pi. So karon, si pi karon will now contain the value of 3.14. Okay? So with that, paano imong build log, so mana siya karon na-assign na siya dinhan nimo. Okay? So be sure na ang imong pi is constant man siya, dili siya gamiton nga R value, L value. R value ra siya. Dili pwede siya mubutang, pero di siya nimo pwede butangan. Okay? It's very absurd nga ang pi imong usbon during the time sa imong execution. So mana nga dili siya pwede gamiton nga L value. Okay, so you need to be sure of this particular parts in your program because later on, mauna ni ang means para ma-structure ninyo properly ang inyong code. Okay, so this is just sa mga tidbits, no? mga bits of information for you to make use of later on sa pag-structure na sa inyong code. And next meeting, we'll be applying this in solving a particular problem, okay, or coding a particular solution for a very simple nga programming problem. Okay, now, going back. So, balik ka sa atong discussion. So much with this code. No? Discussion, balik. Stop sharing. Now, go back to our discussion. We'll now go into the scope in C. So, may nalitag scope in C. These are the limits, no? Matag scope and limitation. So, may kanikag scope in our dialect mo siya gitawag na langkob, asara kutob, no? Langkob, bounds sa ato ang program. So, inside a function or a block which is called a local, which are called local variables, this can be used only for your particular block. So, inside a function or a block, it is called local variables. The definition of function parameters are called formal parameters. Outside all the functions, it's called a global variable. Okay? So, pareha ganina. Yung tag pi. Ang pi is a global variable because it is outside the function main. Now, kung ang imong function main katubang na bound in curly brace na kay variables such as x, y, and w nga gibutang dito, those variables are local. Meaning, kadto nga mga variables, dili ito nimo magamit po gawas sa function main. So, local variables for a particular function block. Global variables are those variables outside any function block. Okay, katong function block, katong bound by curly brace as what we have given for you the example earlier. So, for example, no, kani, may nanta karon o itong code, no? Global variables, integer g. So, si integer g is a global variable. Global in such a way that it can be used by integer function main, magamit siya nimo dinhi, o pwede po nimo siya magamit sa lain po nga function that you will be using later. On the other hand, integer a and b can only be used for your particular function na main. It cannot be used outside of function main. Okay? So that is part of our coverage later. Now, arithmetic operations or arithmetic operators. So in C, there is what's known as the arithmetic expression. So arithmetic expression, these are some common functions in C that you can use in the built-in library function header math.h. So gibali, math.h library contains the items necessary for you to perform mga cosine, sine, tangent. These are mga trigonometric functions, logarithmic functions, and power functions that you can be using later on sa inyong program. Remember na kaninga mga functions na sila return value. So return value gani ilabang result ba nga iuli after sa ilang process nga himuon. Okay, so for example, na kay double power, so ang power mo return siya og double mo dawat siya og value for x, value for y, and ang iyang operation is raised to the power of. So for example, may kag 4 raised to y, value of y ni is let us say 7, so 4 raised to 7, mo na iyang i-return nga result for your arithmetic expression in that sense. So naa kay hypotenuse, square root, absolute value, FA, absolute, and floor. So these are some mathematical functions that you will be using later. Okay? So not all, but maybe some of the functions can be very useful sa inyong mga operations. So another is what is known as mga random numbers. So sa random numbers ninyo karon, this will involve standard library H, mga rand o mga srand. So may ganitag rand, randomized na number nga i-produce sa imong program. Okay? So na built-in library to perform that, and of course srand. Okay? So these are mga random numbers nga inyong i-generate. Now, let's go to some particular examples. So before we'll be going into this, so arithmetic operators. So Balik sa atong example. Anhi. Now, for example, no, sa kanina program, this particular program, we'll be expanding this, no? We'll be, let us say, expanding this particular program to include certain math functions. So if you want to include certain math functions, you will just be saying, sharp include, anhi, karon, math.h. Okay? So that will be your math functions. Now, remember, nga sa inyong mga math functions, you can make use of certain operators. For example, may yung kakaroon na, let us say, a particular number, no? So, say na, ini, square root. Square root of, let us say, the value of x. Okay? So, the value of x, 10, may imong kaon yung square root. Now, once you will be doing that, no, makakuha na ka sa iyahang operation sa kanang square root. If you will be compiling this particular piece of code, no, so walay error. Now, in here, you can see na kanang iyang gi-executing operation. But if you will be removing that, no, kanin siya, for example, i-remove, comment lang ako. No? So, once imo nang tanggalon, it will give you a particular flagan kaniya na wala kunoy declaration sa function nga square root. Okay, walay implicit declaration. So sa daan ng mga compilers ani nila karon, iya kang flagan og error. Kay that particular function doesn't exist. So with that, it is very important nga inyo yung i-include ang iyahang library for that particular function. Okay? So, I also failed to it's not yet particularly included in hikaron. Ang inyong gitawag nga mga input or output statements in C programming. So, if you'll be saying input statements, muna sila ang katong mga mudawat sa variable. Okay, so I'll just be showing it here. No? Kung na lang i-show ninyo ang handouts na dito ang inyong kuan. So, for example, minta karon og mga input statements nato karon. Ang kanang mga input statements, these are the statements necessary for you to perform particular processes nga modawat sa input. So for example, I'll just be zooming this in. So for example, ang inyong mga input statements, input-output statements. So printf is commonly known as the input statement. So, output statement. So this will send an output terminal usually bound by a semicolon. Okay, so, or bound by curly kanang quotation marks, open and close quotation marks for a string nga i-display. On the other hand, if you will be displaying a particular gitawag nato nga variable nga imong i-display, you place first what is known as the format specifier. So mantag format specifier karon ang iya habang klase sa data type nga imong ipa-display. So kung mo pa-display bakag integer, mo pa-display bakag double, naa siya gitawag nato nga format specifier. So ang mga format specifier niya as follows: kung integer gani %d, kung floating characters gani %f, o kung character gani siya %c. Kung kanang double gani siya, usually ilan ang ibutang ana is LF or long float. Okay? So, mao na siya imuhang input. But if you'll be going into the input side, that is for output, no? Standard output nga statement in stdio is the scanf na statement. So for this particular example, ang scanf is also using the same format specifier, place it in a double quotation, and place an and sign, meaning an address na sign, and pa na siya, ampersand, to that particular variable. Okay? So for example, tas code na to para naamoy concrete na idea of how it is done. Okay? So, for our input and output statements, no, is using this kanang those particular statements. So, example, rin, this is just full screen na lang na ko para makita mo sa output directly. So, for example, you have a code in here. No, this is your code. Just a very simple code. Now, you will be including a math function. So, how about if we don't want to, let us say, just simply perform this operation na variable imong input fixed. Ganahan ka karon nga kanang variable imong input. So you need to have certain kanang means of accepting an input from your computer. So now, first we need to have an indicator. So ang indicator kanirang printf. So may gamit ani niya. This will just simply give you directions kung unsay ipa-input sa user. For example, enter a number to extract root. Okay, ito lang complete square root. Okay, so kung siya imong identifier, then semicolon. Sunod, you place there scanf. So scanf is the means of accepting that particular input. So unsa may atong input karon ani niya? %d. So this is an integer type kana siya. Okay? And something here. 7 and x. Okay? Sunod, once na kay kuan karon that particular statements, ato na siyang i-produce and output. So of course, by producing the output, you just simply write in there this one, the printf function. You say square root of, we have there variable na atong square root. So now, maka-place ka karon og multiple items na iyahang i-display as your variable. So for example, may kag %d, dapat ang iha pong counterpart dinhi sa imong after sa imong comma is also a particular integer. So gibali kani siya nga %d mao pud ni nga i-display niya. Okay? %d og si x. Ang square root kuno niya kay ang imuhang result ani niya. So unsa may result ani niyang result of that particular process. So you can go directly into the particular result of this process. So you can say in here na okay, square root din niya. So you will be using the square root function. But to make it more clear, para mas klaro, ato na lang ni siyang butangan og iyahang variable nga mogunit square root of x. So, butangan nato variable 0.0 starting value and square of x is the square root function of variable x. Okay? Para medyo klaro. Now, in here, as you can see, sa imong format specifier, no, naa kay square root of the value of x, unya, ang sunod niya nga ipa-display ni mga variable is long float. So, unsa man ang long float nga itong ipa-display, karon kani siya nga variable, square of x. Ang result, pag actual extract nimo sa square root of square of x. Okay? Then, you place it there, semicolon. Then, we will try if may wrong sa itong code. No? So, if wala wrong sa itong code, okay? So, print. So, sayo, pili siya print f siya. Okay? So, wrong ang iyahang part name sa function. So, now, pag natunin mo sa atong build log, wala na siya sayop. So, wala na sayop, then you can run your code. Okay? So, mani karon ang atong code na nagiran karon. So, it will ask for an input. Enter a number to extract square root. So, let us say, example, atong i-extract ang square root is 11. Pag-press na itong enter, the square root of 11 is, or kanang duha ka colon, 3.36625. Okay? So this is just a very simple example, no, of extracting a particular number. Ito na lang i-complete to is. I-rerun balik atong code para mas klaro siya. Run our program. Okay. So let us say input na to is 12. Square root of 12 is 3.464. Okay, so I think that concludes our discussion for the day, no? For this particular noon. Unless you have some questions, it's already 12:56 na pa class for the next session. So do you have clarifications regarding our class for today? So later on, ato tong i-expand ang inyong frontier sa coding. That is just the start. Now that will just simply orient you unsay data type, unsay assignment operator, unsay input-output statements, no? Unsay mga variables nga imong gamiton. Okay? So unsay L value, unsay R value, and later on unsay mga math functions nga atong gamiton. But in some advanced topics later, we'll be involved in using specific nga mga or solving specific problems. So kani siya, this is just a hint for how to structure the code. So ang pag-structure ni sa code, dili pa gyud ni ang in general pag-solve sa problem na ihatag nako ninyo later. Okay, so it's 12:57. Questions or clarifications? Napay klase inig ka next meeting o inig ka next meeting o inig ka next meeting. So our classes will actually, since we are lagging behind schedule, we will have a class this week and next week. Okay? So meaning October 18, hopefully, I will be giving to you na the midterm assessment. So medyo tight atong schedule kay late magutan naka-start. So nga we need to speed things up a little bit, not too fast, but just enough for you to have 2 lectures for 1 module. Okay? And ang assessment, i-apas na lang na inyong submit. Okay? Just i-apas ninyo. I will be posting, akong i-post ang inyong complete nga handouts. Dili lang tong slideshow ha. Di man to complete. I will be posting the complete handouts maybe after the discussion of the other section. And also the assessment sa module 1. So, di bali, ang atong cadence ba itong timing is that mag-discuss ko kaduha, then maybe a week later, diha pang assessment so that you can process the entire topic. Of course, you can also view the examples, then you answer those particular assessment. Okay? Okay, so regarding sa define o constant, actually, kani sila kana bang it can be used interchangeably. Okay? So may kag define, mo define ka og equivalent. Ang equivalent ko ni pi kay 3.14. So kung may kag constant, ang constant man gud pwede can be used by itself. So pwede ra nga walay constant ang define. And ang constant can be used for something else. For example, may kag integer constant x equal or const integer, let us say 3. Wala ko na bali ang syntax. Di bali, ang constant can be used for local variables, di lang siya for global variables. So, kung naa kay constant ka gusto nimo within the local context, pwede na nimo siya gamitan o const rather than define. Ang define is generally used for global variables. Ang constant can be used for both global and local. But in terms of its usage, I don't mind kung unsay inyong comfortable gamiton. Basta, solve lang ninyo ang problem. Kung ano maguna silang marabag, it can be used interchangeably if you want it to be so. Okay? Ang constant magod is that na kay data type, kunya imong i-lock sa constant na particular value. Ang define is ang particular kuan kadtong item kay mauto iyang value o gibali naka-rename ra ang kadtong 3.1416 with a literal name. Okay? So, ni-refer siya ba? Ni-refer. Pero ang kadtong constant is that nakay value na integer ba karon, gibutangan nimo og fixed nga content. Okay? So mao ra na ilang general nga difference. But sa iyahang usage, for practicality, no? For practicality dili siya ing anak ka. Dili siya ing anak ka kanang naay diferensya. So for kuan ba pragmatics, dili siya nga naka-diferensya. Pero for kung ganahan jud ka mo go deep into this particular topic, so nagud sila diferensya. But for something pragmatic, kana bang practical ba nga magamit ninyo sa inyong labi na sa mga nag-start pa, dili kaya siya ing ana kadako ilang difference. Okay? So, any more questions? So, later on next meeting no ato tang mag-apply ta og mas taas-taas na program. I will be expanding that particular example. Okay? So, if you don't have any questions, it's already 1:01 na, no? So, see you this Wednesday. We will continue with our kanang discussion. Ang Getch, napanay question ang Getch. Get character na siya. Ang daan magod ng mga compiler, di may ka-Getch, kanang run mo sa imong code, mawa o galit. No? Mawa. So, meaning, open mo, i-run sa code, mugawas tong black na screen, tong DOS na screen, mawa siya galit. Karon ang sa code blocks or isa sa Eclipse, isa sa Visual Studio, na siya prompt nga mugawas para mo indicate nga may end na yung program. Pare ba ganina pag run ako, kung sa daan nga mga compiler like Borland nga C programming, Borland C, mawa to galit. Ano ba nila get character ba, meaning napay usa ka input para ma-close to ang imong window. But dinhi sa inyong program karon, automatic na siya nga gi-enable sa code blocks. Na dili siya mo close once ni end imong program. Tatagan pa kaniya usa ka input. Okay? So, may input pa kagka-usa para ma-close siya. So, gibali ilan na nang gi-address nga issue. Kaya sa tinuran na yan na ma-close ra gyud nagalit, kay nahuman naman ang program. Pero tagal lang kanyang final na prompt para at least dili ka makuan. So later on na ay gamit yun get character na siya. Kung mo gamit kag usa ka character input lang. For example, gawat nimo character tay Z. Z ra yang gamit, hindi na siya marangayog line nga input. So magamit na siya later na to, labi na dito sa switch expression. Now, I'll be giving an example to that later para mas ma-expand pa inyong kanang knowledge about this particular part sa programming. Okay, so it's already 1:03, extend na kita time. So we will be having our discussion. Next meeting, finish our discussion and some examples that you will be making use of. Okay, so if there are no more questions, then thank you for your presence and see you next meeting. Bye.
Thank you.